Tonight, we once again dive deep into the universe of Metroid without the need of a controller or a power-up. But first, if you enjoy this cozy tale, please don't forget to unleash a super missile on that like button, or make it a power bomb and hit the notification bell as well. It helps others discover the channel and join our ranks of weary dreamers. And please share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your suggestions for future content. But for now, get cozy and enjoy tonight's expedition into the mysterious world of Metroid. The desert stretched in every direction like a thing that had forgotten how to end. Caldera 4 turned slowly beneath its twin suns, and the light that fell across its surface came in two rays, one copper, one pale rose, ensuring every ridge and stone cast a pair of shadows that never quite agreed. The wind moved the dust in low curtains that rose and dissolved without sound, and the sky was the color of old bone from horizon to horizon. Samus Aran rode through it alone. Her mount was a dusk strider, a lean, six-legged reptile bred by the colonists for the terrain, its scales the same rust red as the ground it crossed. It moved in a smooth, loping gait that covered distance without urgency, its clawed feet barely disturbing the hardpan. The creature's breath came in slow hisses through the filtration membrane stretched across its nostrils, and its amber eyes blinked against the grit with an ancient, disinterested patience. Samus sat upright in the ridged saddle, her varia suit catching both suns in orange and dull gold. The suit's plating was scarred in places, micro-fractures in the hardened Chozo compound that she'd never bothered to polish out. Her visor reflected the wasteland ahead in a clean green line, and behind her, the twin suns hung low and heavy, casting her double shadow forward across the dust like a path she was meant to follow. The sand shifted a few meters to her left. A low tremor moved beneath the surface, and a ring of crust buckled outward in a pattern that suggested something coiled and large. The dusk strider slowed and hissed. Samus's right hand was bare in its glove one moment, and then the suit answered. Plates along her forearms slid and locked, barrel segments rotating outward from recessed channels in the gauntlet, each one threading into the next with a precise mechanical whisper until the arm cannon sat fully formed where her hand had been. Inside the cannon's base, her fingers settled around the trigger housing, steady and familiar as a habit she had never managed to break. The ground split open. A sand serpent emerged. 3 meters of pale, segmented muscle lined with vestigial sensor spines. Its head rose and swiveled, nostrils flaring wide. It regarded the dusk strider first, then Samus, and something behind its flat black eyes performed a calculation as old as predation itself. The cannon's charge emitter glowed faintly in the rose-colored light. The serpent held still for a long moment, tasting the air. Then, without urgency, it lowered its head and slid back beneath the crust, the sand closing over it like water healing around a stone. She watched the ground settle, the cannon disengaged, plates folding flush, as her gloved hand emerged again. She nudged the Dusk Strider forward, and the animal complied without protest. The mining colony appeared moments later, rising from the hard pan in a cluster of low sun-bleached structures that looked as though the desert had started to swallow them and then lost interest. Atmospheric processors hummed on the outskirts, caked in red dust. A few ore haulers sat idle near a rail depot, their cargo beds empty. The main street, if it could be called that, was a single unpaved corridor lined with supply depots and housing blocks, and at its far end stood a cantina with no sign above the door, just a faded awning and a pair of tinted windows that gave nothing away. Samus tied the Dusk Strider to a hitching rail outside and stepped through the cantina door. The saloon was dim, smelling of stale coolant and unwashed bodies. Conversations died instantly. A dozen pairs of eyes, some human, some alien, fixed on the armored titan filling the doorway. The servo motors in her legs hissed softly as she walked to the bar. The bartender, a withered man with skin like parchment, wiped a glass with a dirty rag. "I'm looking for a group of insectoid pirates," she announced. "Their leader is a bioengineered clone. Designation, Ridley." The bartender set down the glass. Never heard the name. He would be difficult to miss, she insisted. Then he hasn't been here. The bartender studied her visor, trying to find whatever was behind it. The only pirates we know are the Vectes, reptilian, cold-blooded in every sense. They run a protection operation out of the canyon network east of here. Levy a cut from every shipment we pull out of the ground. He paused. You, with the Federation? Bounty hunter, she confirmed. He nodded slowly, as though this confirmed something he already knew. What'll you have? Whatever's cold. He poured her a pale drink that smelled faintly of mineral salts and citrus. Samus retracted her helm and took a drink, letting the ambience of the cantina settle around her. The door opened, spilling amber light and a cold silence into the cantina. The Vectis pirate stood a full head taller than anyone in the room. His scales were a deep, mottled green, scarred along the jaw and throat, where old wounds had healed into ridges of pale cartilage. He wore a bandolier of charge packs across his chest and a holstered ion pistol on his left hip, and he moved with the loose, proprietary ease of someone who had never been told no. He crossed to the bar and struck the counter with an open palm. The sound made two miners visibly flinch. "Tribute's late," the Vectis said. His voice was wet and percussive, shaped by a throat not designed for human language. "Zareth wants it by sundown, or he takes it out of the next ore shipment." The bartender reached beneath the counter and produced a small lockbox. "It's light. The last haul didn't..." "Not my problem." The Vectis took the box without opening it, then turned and surveyed the room as though he were shopping for something to break. His gaze passed over the locals before resting on Samus. He looked at her for a long time. Who's this?" Samus didn't look up from her drink. The pirate stepped closer. "I'm talking to you, Human." He leaned in. "You lost?" "Passing through," she said. "Nobody passes through Caldera 4. He grinned, a wide, unpleasant display of interlocking teeth. "Not without paying the toll." Samus set her glass down. "There's a standing bounty on Vectis raiders operating in this sector. Federation rate." She looked at him. "You should leave before I start collecting." The cantina went still. The pirate blinked once, processing, then laughed. It was a grating, percussive sound, and he let it carry for several seconds before it died. He drew his ion pistol and held it up, turning it so the light caught the charge chamber. It was a Crisari-made sidearm, mid-range, reliable. A decent weapon. "This is what keeps me alive out here," he said. "Let's see yours." Samus considered him for a moment. Then she reached down with her left hand and pressed a release on the Varia suit's left hip plate. A compartment slid open, revealing the blue polymer of the suit she wore beneath, and holstered against it, a compact ion pistol. Older than his, but well maintained. "An old keepsake," she mused. "I've only used it once." The pirate stared at the pistol, then at her, then back at the pistol. He holstered his weapon and laughed. "Ha! Then how are you planning to make me leave, bounty hunter?" Samus stood. She was shorter than the scaled pirate by a full head, but something in the way she occupied space made the difference feel less certain. "By asking nicely," she began calmly, and shaking on it. She extended her right hand. The pirate studied the offering. The armored glove, the fingers open and still. Something in his expression shifted toward amusement. He reached forward and took her hand, squeezing hard enough to make the joint mechanisms creak. "Fine," he said, grinning. "We have a deal. I'll leave when I'm..." His left hand suddenly moved toward his holster, and Samus grinned. The cannon formed in a heartbeat. The plates along her forearms spiraled outward and locked, barrel segments threading together, the mechanism closing around both her hand and his in a single fluid motion. Inside the cannon's housing, her fingers found the trigger grip, while the pirate's hand was caught in the collapsing architecture of the weapon. The appendage was mutilated in a series of sharp, interlocking clicks, followed by a dense, wet compression. The pirate screamed. It was a raw, animal sound that emptied the word of meaning. He wrenched backward as the cannon released him, its segments retracting smoothly to reveal Samus's gloved hand once more. What remained of the pirate's right hand hung from his wrist at an angle that should not have been possible, crushed beyond recognition, leaking pale blood onto the floor. He staggered back, cradling the ruin against his chest. His eyes were wide with a terror that had burned away every scrap of bravado. He didn't reach for his pistol again. He turned and ran, shouldering through the door and out into the copper light. The cantina was silent. Then the bartender spoke, and his voice was tight and low. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Samus shrugged before finishing her drink. "I asked him to leave. Zareth will burn this colony to the ground." A miner stood from his table, his hands shaking. "He's done it before. Settlement 40 clicks north. Nothing left but slag and bones. You've killed us." Another miner spoke. "She needs to leave. Now. Before they find out where it happened." "They'll find out regardless," the bartender said quietly. He was looking at her, not with anger exactly, but with the exhausted despair of a man watching the last of something slip away. "They always do." Samus set the empty glass on the counter. She looked at the miners, their hollowed faces, their cracked hands, their fear. It was a familiar arithmetic. Walk away, and the scales balance against them. Stay, and it balanced against her. She had been looking for Ridley's clone. The trail was cold. The Vectis were not her mission, but the damage was already done, and someone would have to pay for the transgression. How many Vectis operate out of the canyon network? She asked. The bartender watched her for a long moment. 8, maybe 10, plus Zareth. Samus re-engaged her helm. The green line of the display settled across her vision, and her display lit up in a litany of data readouts. "I'll stay," she announced, "and collect the bounty on these Vectis pirates." The announcement was met with shrugs and unconvinced grunts. No one thanked her, nor did she expect them to. Samus spent the night in a storage shed at the colony's edge, her back against the wall, her visor dimmed to a passive scan. She did not sleep so much as she allowed her body to rest while her mind maintained a low, continuous inventory of sound and movement beyond the walls. The atmospheric processors hummed. The wind carried dust against the metal siding in soft, arrhythmic waves. Twice, a dusk strider called out in the darkness, a thin, reedy sound. By morning, she had mapped the colony's layout from memory and identified 3 defensible positions, 2 viable escape routes, and 1 structural weakness in the eastern perimeter wall that the Vectis would almost certainly exploit if they came in force. She did not eat with the colonists. She did not speak with them. When a local approached to ask how long she planned to stay, she told him as long as it took and nothing more, and the man retreated with the careful haste of someone who had touched something hot. The twin suns climbed, the shadows doubled, and the day settled into its slow, copper-colored rhythm. Samus was checking the charge on her arm cannon near the water depot when she heard the voices. They came from the residential block, a row of low habitation units pressed together like teeth in a tired jaw. 2 Vectis had entered the colony from the eastern ridge, moving with the casual authority of creatures who had learned that nothing here would resist them. They were smaller than the one from the cantina, leaner, but they carried the same Cresari ion pistols and wore the same bandoliers of charge packs, and their scales caught the twin light in patterns of green and black that shifted as they moved. They had stopped in front of a habitation unit. A woman stood in the doorway. She was slight, dark-haired, with the sun-roughened hands of someone who had worked the ore lines. Behind her, half hidden by her hip, a boy of perhaps 7 watched with wide, still eyes. The woman's arm was across the boy's chest, not pulling him back, just there, a barrier made of bone and skin, and the knowledge that it would not be sufficient. The taller Vectis leaned close. "Your husband's debt doesn't die with him," he said. His voice carried the same wet consonants as the pirate from the cantina, but there was something more deliberate in his cadence, more rehearsed. "Zareth is patient, but patience has a price. Pay what's owed, or we take something of equal value." His gaze drifted down to the boy, starting small. The woman's hand tightened on the child's shoulder. "Please, I have nothing left. The last shipment? Too bad, the taller Vectis hissed. Samus had stopped walking. The threatening scene reached her across the dust and open air, and somewhere deep inside her, it snagged on a memory old and buried. The canyon walls of Caldera 4 dissolved. The copper light shifted to the cold, sterile white of Colony K2L, and she was small again, so small, crouched behind the hydroponics housing with her knees drawn to her chest, and her father's hand still warm where he had pushed her into the gap between the units. She could see through the slats. She could see everything. Virginia Aran stood in the corridor with her arms outstretched, Rodney half a step behind her. The creature they faced was vast, winged, and wrong. Ridley. In his clawed hand, he held an ion pistol, compact, efficient, almost delicate against the scale of him, and he pointed it at Virginia the way a child points at something it intends to break. 2 shots. That was all it took. 2 small, bright sounds that ended everything Samus had been and started everything she would become. She had not screamed. She had not moved. She had stayed in the gap between the housing units and watched her parents fall. But the image of the pirate and the pistol he carried had remained forever etched in her mind. The canyon walls returned. The copper suns returned. And the harassing pirates returned. Samus was already moving. The 2 Vectis heard her boots on the hardpan and turned. The taller one had time to register the armor, the green visor, the arm cannon that was already fully formed and humming with a charge that turned the air around it faintly blue. He had time to reach for his pistol. He did not have time to draw it. The first shot was a concussive pulse, non-lethal at range, devastating at 12 meters. It struck the taller Vectis in the chest and sent him backward into the wall of the adjacent housing unit. The polymer buckled. He did not get up. The second Vectis was faster. He cleared his holster and fired twice, and both shots struck her in the left pauldron. The ion bolts flared against the Varia suit's energy shielding and dissipated in bright, harmless fractals, like sparks drowning in water. Samus did not slow. She closed the distance in 4 strides, caught the pirate's gun hand with her left, and brought the cannon's barrel up beneath his jaw. The weapon's charge emitter glowed against his scales before swallowing his head in blue light. The body fell to its knees before slumping forward. Samus deactivated the cannon and turned to the woman and the boy. The former was pressed against the doorframe, breathing in shallow, rapid pulls. The boy stood at her side with his eyes fixed on Samus, and in his expression there was no fear, only admiration. "Wow, that was cool," he exclaimed. "My name is Dallas, and this is my mom, Eliana. What's yours?" Samus studied them for a moment without responding. "Stay inside," she said finally. "Keep the door sealed." She turned and walked back toward the eastern ridge without waiting for a response. Behind her, Eliana pulled Dallas into the unit, the door hissing shut behind them. Samus went into the canyons at dusk, when the twin suns stacked on the horizon, and the light turned the rock walls into something that looked like the interior of a furnace. Hot gold at the top, deep amber in the middle, and a violet so dark it was nearly black pooling in the corridors below. The Varia suit was built for places like this, Its thermal visor painted the canyon network in gradients of blue and orange, and every living thing within 300 meters became a bright signature against the cool stone. She moved along the upper ridge, tracking the heat trails the Vectis left behind them like phosphorescent footprints. The suit's motion sensors fed data to her HUD in clean, scrolling lines: distance, elevation, atmospheric composition, wind speed. The air in the canyons was thinner than on the surface and carried trace amounts of sulfur from the deep vents, and the suit filtered it without effort, feeding her clean oxygen at a steady, regulated flow. Samus found the first Vectis at a water siphon, a crude pump station the pirates had rigged to tap the colony's underground supply line. He was alone, sitting on an ore crate, his ion pistol resting on his knee. He was watching the pump's rhythmic pulse and didn't see her descend the rock face above him in a series of controlled, silent drops, the suit's grip pads finding purchase on surfaces that would have defeated bare hands. She landed behind him. The arm cannon formed in the time it took him to register the sound, that brief, mechanical whisper of plates and segments locking into sequence. He turned. The cannon's muzzle was 6 inches from his face, and behind it, the charge emitter was already cycling to full, casting his scales in pale blue light. He reached for his pistol. The shot was a single pulse, clean and controlled. The siphon station went quiet. Samus moved on. The second Vectis was in a narrow gorge, a half-kilometer east, posted as a lookout on a natural shelf overlooking the main canyon approach. He had a long-range ion rifle and a comm unit, and he was the most dangerous of the outer guard because he could call for reinforcements before she reached him. The Varia suit solved the problem. She activated the morph ball configuration, a transformation that still, after all these years, felt like folding a house into a coin. The suit's plating contracted and restructured around her compressed form, and in less than a second, she was a sphere of gold-orange alloy rolling silently through a drainage channel cut into the gorge floor. The channel ran directly beneath the lookout shelf. She traveled 40 meters in near-perfect silence, the suit's gyroscopic stabilizers keeping her path true. When she reached the base of the shelf, she unfolded beneath the outcrop like something the rock had decided to grow. The lookout heard the soft click of the cannon engaging. He turned with the rifle already rising. Samus fired a freeze pulse from the suit's secondary emitter, a beam of cryogenic particulate that struck the rifle's barrel and turned it into a brittle sculpture of white frost. The weapon shattered when he tried to fire it. A second pulse caught him in the chest, and the ice spread across his bandolier, locking his arms to his sides. He fell from the ledge and struck the canyon floor with a sound like something fragile being set down too hard. The third Vectis tried to flee. He had a dusk strider tethered in a side canyon, and he reached it before Samus cleared the ridge above him. For a moment, it seemed like the distance would save him. The dusk strider was fast, bred for the terrain, 6 legs churning the dust into a low, spreading wake. But the Varia suit's targeting system did not care about distance. The HUD tracked the fleeing pirate in a clean red bracket, calculating trajectory, wind resistance, and the dusk strider's gait cycle. Samus raised the arm cannon and fired a single tracking missile, a small, bright point of light that left the barrel with a soft hiss and arced across the canyon in a long, impatient curve. It struck the ground 2 meters ahead of the Dusk Strider, and the concussive blast sent animal and rider tumbling into the soft sand of a dune bank. The pirate lay still. The Dusk Strider untangled itself, shook the dust from its scales, and wandered off with the indifferent calm of a creature that had simply decided to stop being involved. 3 down. She stood on the ridge and looked east, where the canyon network deepened and the shadows pooled like something with sinister intent. Somewhere in that darkness, Zareth was receiving reports and plotting an appropriate retaliation. She turned back toward the colony. The twin suns had set, and the sky held their memory in a long, fading band of copper and rose that stretched from one edge of the world to the other. Her suit systems hummed around her, atmosphere regulated, shields at full capacity, ammunition cycling, visor painting the dark terrain in clean thermal gradients. Inside the suit, she was warm and armed, and more dangerous than anything this planet had ever produced. She thought of Eliana and the boy, Dallas. She did not think about the ion pistol at her hip, or the 2 small bright sounds it had made in a corridor on K2L, or the way the light had looked on its barrel as it was carried away by Ridley. She did not think about her burden, because it was hers, alone. 3 days passed. Samus slept in the storage shed, ate alone, and spoke to the colonists only when operational details required it. She had established a perimeter using the suit's sensor network. Small, disc-shaped motion trackers pressed into the hardpan at intervals along the colony's eastern and northern edges. If anything with a heat signature larger than a sandmouse crossed within 200 meters, she would know. Dallas found her on the 3rd morning. She was servicing her arm cannon's charge emitter at a workbench outside the water depot when a shadow fell across the surface that was too small and too still to be an adult's. She did not look up. "You're the hunter," the boy said. "Yes. My mom says you saved us." Samus removed a fouled capacitor coil and set it aside. "Your mother should keep you inside." Dallas did not leave. He stood at the edge of the workbench with his hands behind his back, watching her work with focused attention. "What's the pistol for?" he asked without preamble. Samus's hands stopped. "The one on your hip," Dallas continued. "Under the armor. Mott told me about it. He said you told the pirate you don't use it anymore." He paused. "So why do you carry it?" The question was simple. The answer was not. Samus set down her tools. She looked at the boy, really looked at him, for the first time since they had met. He had his mother's dark hair and her sharp, quiet features, but his eyes belonged to someone else, someone absent, and they held the particular steadiness of a child who had already learned that the world could take things from you without asking. She recognized that steadiness. She had built her life on top of it. "It belonged to someone who hurt me," she said. "A long time ago." Dallas waited. "His name was Ridley. He raided the colony where I grew up, a place called K2L. She turned the capacitor coil in her fingers slowly, watching the light move across its surface. My parents were Virginia and Rodney Aran. My mother was a biologist. My father was an engineer. They were good people, and they They stood between Ridley and the people he wanted to kill, and he used that pistol to take them from me. The words came out flat and level, recited rather than spoken, as though she had compressed the memory into something dense enough to handle without it cutting her. I was small, smaller than you. I hid in a gap between two housing units and watched through the slats. She paused. 2 shots. That's all it took. Dallas was very still. Did you find him? Ridley? Yes. Did you kill him? Yes. She set the coil down. And I took the pistol, not because I needed it, because I wanted to carry the weight of what he did, so I would never forget why I fight. She looked at the boy. That's why I don't use it. It's not a weapon to me. It's a reminder. Dallas considered this with the gravity that children sometimes carry more honestly than adults. My dad died in the mines, he said finally. Cave in. The Vecties wouldn't let the crews shore up the tunnels because it slowed production. He looked at his hands. Mom says it wasn't anyone's fault, but I think she just says that so I won't be angry. Being angry is fine, she assured. Letting it make your decisions isn't. They sat in silence for a moment, and the silence was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that forms between two people who have discovered, without intending to, that their wounds share a shape. Eliana appeared in the doorway of the adjacent housing unit. She looked at Dallas, sitting with the armored woman who had killed 3 pirates in her canyons, and something in her expression moved between fear and gratitude and landed on a third thing, something softer and more complicated. She met her gaze and nodded once, very slightly. Samus returned the gesture. It was the most she had given anyone in a very long time. She went back into the canyons that afternoon and did not return until the following dawn. The Vecties had adapted. They moved in pairs now, kept to the deeper corridors where the canyon walls narrowed and the thermal signatures blurred against the heated rock. They had set traps, crude proximity charges buried in the sand, tripwire emitters stretched across the corridors at ankle height. Amateur work, but it spoke to desperation, and desperation made even simple creatures dangerous. The Varia suit answered each challenge with the indifference of superior engineering. Samus's visor cycled between thermal, echo, and scan modes, layering data until every trap revealed itself as a bright annotation on her heads-up display. She navigated the tripwires by switching to the morph ball, rolling beneath them in a compact sphere of gold alloy, her suit's sensors mapping the corridor ahead in real time, and detonated the proximity charges from a safe distance with low-yield concussive pulses from the arm cannon. Samus found 2 Vecties guarding a supply cache in a chamber hollowed from the canyon wall. The suit's scan visor identified their weapons, armor weak points, and stress fractures in the ceiling above them. One missile, precisely placed, brought a shelf of sandstone down across the chamber entrance, sealing one inside while the other scrambled for the exit. Samus met him there. The encounter lasted 4 seconds. A third pirate ambushed her from a concealed alcove, firing a burst of ion bolts that lit the narrow corridor in stuttering blue-white flashes. Every shot struck the Varia suit's shielding and was absorbed, and the suit's energy reserve barely flickered. Samus turned, arm cannon already formed, and put him down with a single charged shot that left a fading ring of ozone in the dark air. By morning, Sarith's operation had been reduced to the leader and perhaps one or two remaining scouts. The canyon network was quiet, the traps were spent, and the supply caches were cold. Samus returned to the colony expecting a final confrontation on her terms. She found Eliana kneeling in the dust outside her housing unit. The door was open, its lock mechanism sheared clean. Inside, the unit had been ransacked, furniture overturned, storage containers emptied, the small, careful evidence of a life built on almost nothing scattered across the floor. Dallas was gone. Eliana looked up as she approached. Her eyes were dry, but the dryness was worse than tears. It was the expression of a woman who had moved past grief into the clear, cold territory beyond it. In her hands, she held a small, metallic disc, a message beacon. Samus took it. She pressed the activation stud, and Sarith's voice filled the air between them, low, deliberate, shaped by a throat designed for harder consonants than human language required. Hunter, you've taken my crew, my supplies, my territory. You fight like something out of a nightmare, wrapped in a machine I can't match. So I'm changing the terms. A pause, the sound of breathing, slow, reptilian, patient. The boy is alive. He stays alive as long as you come to the cradle, the plateau at the canyon's eastern mouth. Come alone. Come without the suit. One weapon, one fight, or I send him back to his mother in pieces. The message ended. Eliana's voice was barely a whisper. He's only 7. The woman paused, her eyes swelling with tears. I'll bring him back, Samus assured her. Eliana searched the visor for something. Eyes, maybe, or the particular quality of conviction that could survive the gap between a promise and its fulfillment. Whatever she found there, it was sufficient. She nodded. Samus turned and walked toward the eastern ridge. Behind her, the twin suns climbed into position as if settling in to watch what happened next. The cradle was a natural plateau that jutted from the canyon's eastern mouth like a stone stage built for an audience of dust and sky. The ground was flat, wind-scoured, pale as bone. On 3 sides, the canyon walls rose in sheer faces of layered sandstone. On the 4th, the plateau dropped away to a long slope of scree and scrub that ran down to the desert floor, where the heat shimmer made the horizon breathe. Sarith stood at the plateau's center with Dallas in front of him, one clawed hand resting on the boy's shoulder. He was larger than his crew, broader through the chest, his scales a darker green that was nearly black along the spine and jaw. Old scars crossed his face in pale lines that caught the light like cracks in polished stone. He wore no bandolier. His ion pistol sat in a holster on his right hip, and his hand rested near it with the easy, practiced proximity of someone who had drawn and fired more times than he could count. Dallas was still. His face was pale, but his eyes held that same steadiness Samus had recognized at the workbench, the look of a child who had already lost enough to know that fear was just another thing you carried. Samus stopped at the plateau's edge, 20 meters out. The Varia suit caught both suns and held them in dull gold. Sarith studied her. So, the nightmare has a shape after all. His voice was quieter than the recording, more controlled. I watched the footage from the cantina. I've seen what that suit does to my soldiers. You crushed Drevik's hand like it was made of wet paper. He tilted his head. But I need to know something, Hunter. I need to know if you're anything without the machine. Let the boy go, she demanded. Then we'll discuss it. No. The boy is the only reason you're standing there instead of putting a missile through my chest from a kilometer out. Sarith's hand tightened on Dallas's shoulder, and the boy winced, but did not cry out. Here are the terms. You take off the suit, all of it. You face me with one sidearm, same as me. We draw. Winner walks away. He paused. If I see even one piece of that armor still on you when I count to 10, the boy dies first. She was still for a long moment. The HUD painted Sarith in targeting data, distance, heart rate, the precise location of every vulnerable point on his anatomy. The suit could end this in less than a second. One missile, one charged shot. But Dallas was standing in the line of fire with a clawed hand on his shoulder, and the equation did not balance. Okay, she relented. No armor. Sarith smiled and loosened his grip on Dallas. Samus reached up and pressed the manual release at the base of her helmet. The visor's green display flickered and went dark. And suddenly, the world was unfiltered. Raw light, raw heat, raw distance, without annotation or calculation. The helmet retracted first, with a soft, pneumatic hiss. The rest followed. Pauldrons, chest plate, arm segments, leg guards, each piece disengaging from the bodysuit's anchor points with the same quiet precision that had held them together. The cannon arm was last, its segments retracted and unlocked, the barrel housing folding away, plates sliding free until the entire assembly released, allowing Samus to step out of her protective suit. Behind her, the hollow armor stood like a statue, dormant, useless. Samus stood in the blue polymer bodysuit, lean and still, the twin suns falling across her shoulders. Her blonde hair shifted in the wind. She looked, to anyone who didn't know better, like someone who had no business standing on a plateau opposite a 7-foot reptilian warlord with a gun. But her eyes told a different story. They were blue and clear and as steady as steel. They held the calm of a person who'd faced far worse. The ion pistol sat in its holster on her left hip. Ridley's pistol. The pistol that had ended her childhood with 2 shots back on K2L. She had carried its weight across a dozen worlds and 100 missions, and she had never fired it. Not once, since the day she took it from the monster's cold hand. Samus rested her fingers near the grip. Sarith released Dallas's shoulder and pushed him to the side. The boy stumbled, caught himself, and looked at her with an expression that held fear and trust in equal measure. She met his eyes for a fraction of a second and gave him the smallest nod. Barely a movement, just a shift in the angle of her jaw. Sarith squared his stance. His hand hovered over his holster. His pupils narrowed to black slits in the copper light, and his lips pulled back to reveal the interlocking teeth. But this time, there was no grin. This was something else. This was the face of a creature who had fought and killed and survived long enough to respect the thing standing in front of him. "On the draw," he said. The plateau was silent. The wind had stopped. The twin suns hung at the midpoint of their descent, and their light fell across the stone in two overlapping pools of copper and rose that painted the two combatants in the same warm, indifferent glow. Sarith drew. He was fast. His hand closed on the pistol grip, cleared the holster, and the barrel was rising. Samus was faster. The ion pistol was in her hand before Sarith's weapon reached level. She fired once, a single bright point of light that crossed the 20 meters between them in the time it took the plateau to register the sound. The bolt struck him in the center of his chest, and his body absorbed the impact with a shudder that traveled from his sternum to his extremities. His pistol discharged into the stone at his feet. His knees buckled, and then he fell. Sarith lay on his back in the dust, one hand pressed to the wound, pale blood spreading between his fingers. His breathing was shallow and wet, and his eyes, wide now, stripped of menace, found Samus as she walked toward him, the pistol still in her hand, her footsteps quiet on the stone. She stood over him and looked down, and for a moment, the only sound was his breathing and the wind beginning to move again across the plateau. "You wanted to know if I was anything without the suit," Samus said, her voice calm, almost gentle. "Now you know." Sarith's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The light left his eyes in a slow recession, like a tide pulling back from a shore it had no intention of returning to. And then he was still. Samus holstered the pistol. She crossed to Dallas, knelt in front of him, and placed one hand on his shoulder. It was brief and careful, and it carried the weight of a promise kept. "Come on," she said. "Let's get you back home." The colony came alive in a way Samus had not seen before. Miners stood in the main street and watched her ride in with Dallas sitting in front of her on the saddle, looks of awe and gratitude on their stained faces. Eliana was running before the dusk strider stopped. She pulled Dallas from the saddle and held him against her chest with both arms. Dallas buried his face in her shoulder, arms locked around his mother's neck. Samus dismounted and stood apart. She watched the reunion with an unguarded expression that her visor, thankfully, hid. The bartender approached. He carried a satchel and held it out. "Federation bounty on Vectis operations in this sector. The comm relay confirmed it an hour ago." He paused, then added, "The Colony Council wanted to offer you a share of the next ore shipment as well." She held up a dismissive hand. "The bounty is sufficient." "You could stay," Dallas offered enthusiastically. "No." It was not cruel, the way she said it. It was simply the truth. "I can't, Dallas," she added. "My path lies beyond the stars." Eliana approached, her eyes still wet with gratitude. "Thank you." "Will you come back?" Dallas asked. Samus studied him through the green display. The HUD showed his heat signature small, steady, promising many years to come. "Maybe," she said, "you just take care of your mother for now." She mounted the Dusk Strider and turned it toward the western ridge. The colony fell away behind her, and the desert opened ahead in a vast, unbroken plain of rust and ochre that ran all the way to the horizon, where her gunship sat on its landing struts like a dark, patient bird waiting for its rider to return. Ahead, the twin suns were setting. She rode into the light. Her suit caught it and held it, dull gold turning briefly luminous, as though the armor itself were saying its goodbyes. Behind her, Eliana and Dallas stood at the colony's edge and watched her disappear into the setting suns. Samus did not look back. She never did. But this time, something followed her as she approached the gunship. Dallas's soft voice, Eliana's tearful eyes, the weight of a colony's gratitude. She reached the gunship and sealed the hatch behind her. The engines burned bright against the darkening sky. The colony disappeared into dust and distance as she rose to meet the frontier, leaving everything fragile and human-shaped far below. The hunt continued. Ridley's clone was still out there, somewhere. Samus Aran plotted her course and jumped to light speed, and towards the promise of claiming vengeance. For a second, time